The morning sun had barely crested the horizon when young men all across America stirred from restless sleep, their hearts a mix of excitement and fear. For some, the day marked the beginning of a journey they had anticipated with pride. For others, it was the unknown, a call that carried both promise and danger. From the streets of small towns in Pennsylvania to the farmlands of Iowa to the industrial neighborhoods of Chicago and Detroit, the draft notices had arrived. Some had volunteered, driven by patriotism or the thrill of adventure, while others were drafted, leaving behind homes, families, and familiar faces to answer the nation's call. Private John Harris of Lancaster, Pennsylvania, was one of the latter. At 18, he had worked the fields with his father, rising before dawn to help feed the family's modest farm. The day he received his draft notice, his mother wept silently, pressing a photograph of the family into his hands, and his father clapped him on the prosser. Shoulder, pride etched into every line of his face. "Go do what must be done, son. Make us proud." John didn't yet know the weight those words would carry, nor the cost of the pride they demanded. Meanwhile, across the country in Detroit, Michael O'Connor, a factory worker, packed his bag with the same mixture of trepidation and determination. He had seen Europe in the news, the rising threat of Hitler, the invasion of Poland, and felt a call to defend freedom. "If not me, then who?" he whispered to himself as he kissed his younger sister goodbye, promising to return. Each young man had his own reason to fight, his own fear to confront, and his own story that would now become part of the vast, unfolding narrative of the war. Arrival at the training camps was both a shock and a revelation. Rows of barracks stretched into the horizon, a regimented world of order and discipline entirely different from the freedom of home. Drill sergeants barked commands with voices sharp, enough to pierce the soul. Every movement, every step, every salute was scrutinized. At first, the new recruits stumbled, unsure of themselves, fumbling with rifles heavier than they had imagined, struggling to maintain formation in the sweltering heat or the biting cold. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, they began to change. The days blurred into weeks. Morning reveille, roll calls, physical training, weapon drills, obstacle courses, marching long distances with packs that seemed to grow heavier by the mile. Sweat and mud were constant companions. Yet amid the exhaustion, a transformation occurred. Boys became soldiers. Bonds were forged in the most unlikely places. Shared rations under a starry sky, whispered words of encouragement during grueling exercises, laughter that broke through tension when a fellow recruit tripped over a rope or fell face first into the mud. These were the beginnings of brotherhood, forged in the fire of shared struggle. Private Harris remembered the first night he slept under the canvas of his tent. The wind whistled through the edges, carrying with it the sounds of men breathing, the occasional cough, the distant whistle of a train or a call in the darkness. He clutched the photograph of his family, his fingers tracing the faces of his mother, father, and younger sister. He imagined the fields of Lancaster and the simple comfort of home. And in that moment, he understood what courage truly meant. It was not the absence of fear, but the willingness to face it, to stand and move forward even when every instinct screamed to turn back. Training was harsh, and the instructors relentless. Corporal Stevens, a veteran of the previous World War, drilled the young men in close-quarters combat, rifle handling, and tactical maneuvers. "Discipline is your shield, boys," he would bark. "Follow orders without hesitation. Hesitation gets you killed. Hesitation gets your buddy killed." And so they learned to obey, to act without thinking, to trust one another with their lives. Each mistake, each failure was a lesson etched deeply into their minds. The soldiers were also taught the art of resilience. Endless marches tested their endurance, while obstacle courses tested their agility and mental toughness. Soldiers learned to push past pain, to ignore blisters, exhaustion, and hunger. They were molded into a force capable of enduring the chaos of battle, capable of surviving when circumstances seemed impossible. It was here, in these early days, that they learned the first lesson of war. Survival depended not only on skill, but on camaraderie. The man beside you could be the difference between life and death. Amid the rigors of training, moments of humanity persisted. During brief respites, soldiers shared stories of home. Michael O'Connor would speak of the factory lines where he worked, the songs his mother sang while cooking dinner, the laughter of his younger siblings. John Harris spoke of his farm, the smell of the soil after rain, the quiet comfort of early mornings. These recollections reminded them of the world they were fighting to protect and the lives they hoped to return to. Discipline also extended to mental conditioning. Soldiers were taught not just how to fight, but why they fought. Lectures, propaganda, films, and stories of heroism instilled a sense of purpose. They learned about the tyranny of Axis powers, the invasion of sovereign nations, the persecution of innocents. It was a call to action, a reminder that their service was part of something larger than themselves. They were not merely soldiers. They were defenders of freedom, a shield against oppression, a living testament to the values of a nation. Despite the harshness, moments of levity persisted. Soldiers found humor in the mundane, slipping in the mud, failing a drill, or teasing one another after a long march. These small interactions became vital, a way to cope with the unrelenting stress and the looming reality of war. Laughter, brief and fragile, served as a reminder that they were still human, still capable of joy, even as they were being prepared for unimaginable hardships. The culmination of basic training brought with it both pride and apprehension. Soldiers marched in formation, inspected by officers who measured their readiness with critical eyes. Physical endurance, tactical knowledge, and mental resilience were all tested, and those who succeeded earned the right to move closer to the front lines. For many, it was the first time they felt the weight of responsibility. They were no longer boys. They were soldiers, entrusted with the lives of their comrades and the fate of the mission ahead. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of crimson and gold, Private Harris and Michael O'Connor sat quietly, reflecting on the journey that had brought them here. Letters from home had arrived, and they read the words of encouragement again and again, as if repeating them could transfer strength into their weary bones. The sound of the camp, distant laughter, the crackle of a fire, the rhythmic cadence of soldiers at drill was a constant reminder that they were part of something greater than themselves. In those moments, the soldiers understood the paradox of war. It demanded courage, discipline, and sacrifice. Yet it also fostered an unbreakable bond between men from vastly different backgrounds. They were united by a shared purpose, a shared fear, and a shared hope that they would survive to see the world they left behind. They learned to trust instinct over hesitation, to act without question, and to rely on each other when all else seemed uncertain. As training concluded and deployment orders came through, excitement and anxiety mingled in equal measure. Soon, they would leave the confines of the camp, the safety of structured drills, and enter the chaotic, unpredictable reality of war. Their uniforms were no longer just clothing. They were a symbol of duty, honor, and identity. Each button fastened, each strap adjusted, reminded them of the responsibility they now carried, not just to themselves, but to their country, their families, and the comrades who would fight beside them. Private Harris, Michael O'Connor, and the hundreds of other young men preparing to cross the Atlantic had undergone a transformation. They had been molded from ordinary civilians into soldiers capable of facing the unimaginable. The bonds they had formed, the lessons they had learned, and the courage they had discovered within themselves would become their most valuable assets on the battlefields to come. As they boarded transport ships bound for England, gazing back at the fading coastline of their homeland, a quiet determination settled over them. The war ahead was uncertain, the dangers immense, but they carried with them the spirit of their nation and the strength of the men around them. This was only the beginning of their journey, the first chapter of a story that would test their hearts, their courage, and their humanity. In the quiet before the storm, they steeled themselves for what lay ahead, ready to face the trials that would define a generation. The ocean was grey and relentless as the transport ships carried the young American soldiers across the Atlantic. Waves crashed against the hull, and the wind bit at their faces, a constant reminder that this was no longer training. The reality of war loomed larger with every passing mile. Private John Harris gripped the railing, staring at the horizon, imagining the unknown lands that awaited him. The excitement he had felt in boot camp had been replaced with a more sober-feeling anticipation laced with fear. Beside him, Michael O'Connor adjusted his helmet and glanced at his fellow soldiers. Their faces were a mix of determination, anxiety, and unspoken questions. Would they survive? Would they live up to the expectations of family, country, and themselves? Upon arriving in England, the soldiers were immediately thrust into a new world of preparation. The quiet countryside served as a stark contrast to the barracks and training grounds they had left behind. Here, they learned to navigate unfamiliar terrain, practice amphibious landings, and coordinate with Allied forces. It was in these fields and small villages that they understood the scale of what lay ahead. Maps were unfurled on tables in dimly lit rooms, and officers spoke of strategies, objectives, and the enemy they would face. The words painted a picture that was both thrilling and terrifying. Reinforced by weeks of intensive training, the soldiers were soon sent to the front lines in France. The first battles were overwhelming. The deafening roar of artillery, the acrid smell of smoke, and the chaos of men shouting orders and firing weapons created a world far removed from the structured drills of boot camp. Each young soldier faced a test they could not have imagined. Fear was immediate and unrelenting. Many froze in the first moments, unsure of what to do. But survival demanded action, and action required trust in training, in leaders, and most importantly, in each other. Private Harris's first combat experience came in the hedgerows of Normandy. The dense foliage offered cover, but also concealed danger. Enemy fire was sudden and deadly. He remembered the sharp crack of rifles, the whine of incoming shells, and the terror of men falling around him. Panic threatened to overwhelm him, but he forced himself to breathe, to remember the drills that had become second nature. Move forward, keep low, cover your buddy. Step by step he advanced, heart pounding, adrenaline carrying him through a landscape that was both surreal and horrifying. Michael O'Connor, assigned to a separate unit, faced a similar baptism. During a night operation, they were ambushed by enemy patrols. Darkness was both a shield and a hazard. In the shadows, O'Connor's unit moved cautiously, rifles at the ready. The sudden flash of a grenade lit the night, revealing the twisted forms of enemy soldiers. Instinct took over. Training dictated the movements, but fear fueled the urgency. Lives depended on split-second decisions, and the weight of responsibility pressed down heavily. In these early encounters, the soldiers discovered the complexity of war. It was not only a matter of strength or bravery, but of perception, adaptability, and psychological resilience. Orders could change in an instant, and the outcome of one decision might save or cost lives. Yet in the midst of the chaos, bonds formed. Harris and his squad learned to communicate silently with hand signals, to anticipate each other's actions, and to cover weaknesses without hesitation. The trust between men became unbreakable, a lifeline in a world where danger was omnipresent. Amidst the battles, the soldiers confronted a range of emotions. Fear, doubt, and grief intertwined with moments of courage, pride, and relief. A wounded comrade brought back from the front lines, a life saved under fire, a narrow escape from an explosion. These events shaped their perception of war. They learned that heroism was not always grand or dramatic. Often, it was simply surviving while helping others survive, performing small acts of courage in a world dominated by chaos. Letters from home remained a source of comfort and motivation. Harris clutched the words of his mother, feeling the warmth of family despite the distance. O'Connor cherished the small drawings and notes from his younger sister, a reminder of the life waiting for him. These letters were more than mere words. They were anchors to the world they had left behind, reminders that the human connections they cherished could endure even amid the destruction of war. The soldiers also witnessed the devastation inflicted upon civilians and towns. Bombed-out villages, overturned carts, and the remnants of homes caught in the crossfire reminded them that war's toll was not confined to the battlefield. Their training had taught them tactics and strategy, but nothing could prepare them for the human cost. The civilians' fear, desperation, and resilience left a profound mark on the young soldiers. They learned to balance their duty with empathy, to recognize the shared humanity even in the midst of conflict. In quieter moments between skirmishes, the soldiers reflected on the purpose of their mission. The propaganda and lessons instilled during training took on new meaning. They were not simply fighting an enemy. They were defending ideals, protecting those who could not protect themselves, and preserving a way of life threatened by tyranny. Each mission, each engagement was imbued with a sense of higher purpose, a reminder that their sacrifices were part of something far larger than any single battle. Yet, the psychological toll was unavoidable. Nightmares haunted sleep, flashbacks intruded in moments of rest, and the relentless pressure of combat tested mental fortitude. Officers and medics recognized the need for morale and support, encouraging soldiers to speak of their experiences and lean on one another. The strength of the unit, the camaraderie that had been nurtured during training, became a critical asset. Alone, fear could be paralyzing. Together, it was manageable. As the battles in France intensified, the soldiers began to understand the realities of leadership. Non-commissioned officers emerged as pillars of guidance, balancing authority with compassion. They disciplined where necessary, protected their men when possible, and led by example in the heat of combat. Harris observed his sergeant repeatedly place himself in danger to shield younger soldiers, a model of courage and selflessness that inspired him to act beyond his own fear. Through every skirmish, every ambush, every narrow escape, the soldiers grew not only in skill but in resilience. They learned to anticipate the enemy, to trust their instincts, and to adapt to the unpredictable nature of warfare. These lessons, hard-earned and often brutal, would form the foundation for the trials to come. Each day of battle was both a test of physical endurance and a crucible for the spirit. Amid the carnage, moments of humanity still shone through. Soldiers shared rations with starving civilians, offered words of comfort to frightened children, and salvaged belongings for families torn apart by war. These acts of kindness, small as they were, became a reminder that even in the darkest times, the human spirit could endure. They reinforced the soldiers' understanding of why they fought, not for conquest, not for glory, but to protect life and uphold the values that defined their nation. By the end of their first campaigns, Private Harris, Michael O'Connor, and their comrades had transformed. They were no longer the boys who had left home with trembling hearts. They were soldiers tempered by fire, bonded by shared trials, and shaped by the realities of combat. Fear had become familiarity. Courage had become second nature. And the bonds of brotherhood had solidified into unbreakable trust. And yet, as they prepared for the next stage of the war, they knew that the true tests had only just begun. The battles they had faced were the first of many. The lessons learned only the beginning of a journey that would push them to the limits of endurance, morality, and humanity. They had faced fear, stared into chaos, and survived, but the war was far from over, and the crucible of combat would demand even more from their hearts, their minds, and their souls. The sun rose dimly over the smoke-filled horizon, revealing a landscape scarred by artillery and gunfire. American soldiers, once green and inexperienced, were now seasoned enough to recognize the stakes, but no amount of training could erase the weight of what lay before them. The men of the 1st Infantry Division, including Private John Harris and Corporal Michael O'Connor, advanced cautiously across the fields, their rifles clutched tightly, eyes scanning every ridge, every tree line. The enemy could be anywhere. In the early hours, a single shell exploded in the distance, sending a shockwave through the ranks. Harris flinched but pressed forward, his mind calculating distances, angles, and cover. The roar of machine guns echoed across the fields, and the smell of gunpowder mixed with the metallic scent of blood. In the first battle of this campaign, men fell around him, friends, comrades, some barely older than teenagers. The chaos was total, yet a strange rhythm emerged. Soldiers moved as if in a single organism, instinct and training guiding them through fear and uncertainty. Michael O'Connor's unit encountered a fortified enemy position on a hill. The Germans had dug in, machine guns mounted, grenades ready. The officers outlined a plan quickly. Harris's company would flank from the left, while O'Connor's group provided covering fire. As they approached, men whispered short prayers. Some muttered goodbyes. The first shots rang out. Harris felt the recoil of his rifle, the vibration of each bullet as it left the barrel. The reality of war, the immediate presence of death, hit him harder than he expected. Every step forward was a negotiation with mortality. The Americans encountered civilians hiding in the ruins of bombed-out villages. Women clutched children, eyes wide with terror, while the elderly pressed themselves against crumbling walls. Harris's squad paused momentarily, allowing families to retreat to safer areas. For a brief moment, the line between soldier and protector blurred. Yet, the soldiers knew they could not linger. The front demanded attention, and every delay could cost lives. The paradox of war became painfully clear. To protect, they often had to leave others behind. By midday, casualties had mounted. The wounded were carried on stretchers, screaming in pain, their cries piercing the haze of gunfire. Harris assisted in pulling a young private from a shell crater, blood soaking through his uniform. He felt a pang of helplessness. The training he had received could not undo what had already happened. Each injury, each death, was a reminder that survival was as much about luck as skill. Yet, amidst the carnage, soldiers displayed acts of bravery that transcended fear. Men shielded comrades from bullets, risked themselves to retrieve the wounded, and advanced under fire to secure objectives that seemed impossible. Michael O'Connor's unit faced a similar ordeal when they were ordered to clear a German-held farmhouse. Every window was a potential threat. Grenades were thrown, smoke filled the air, and the stench of burning wood mingled with the metallic tang of blood. Inside, they found enemy soldiers who refused to surrender. The firefight was brutal and close quarters. O'Connor's hands shook as he fired, each shot a struggle between instinct and conscience. When the last enemy fell, silence descended, heavy and unnatural. The victory was tangible, but the cost was etched into every young face in the room. In these moments, the soldiers began to confront not only the enemy, but the moral complexity of war. Orders sometimes demanded actions that conflicted with personal ethics. Harris witnessed a group of enemy combatants who had surrendered being executed by another unit nearby. The shock of it lingered. Could he remain loyal to duty and still retain his humanity? These questions would accompany him long after the battlefield faded from view. The nights brought no respite. Soldiers dug foxholes and huddled together, trying to stay warm as artillery shells exploded in the distance. Sleep was intermittent, broken by nightmares of falling comrades and burning villages. Harris lay awake, replaying the day's events in his mind, questioning decisions, fearing the next day's challenges. Yet, even in exhaustion, there was camaraderie. Shared rations, whispered conversations, and simple gestures of support, offering a cigarette, sharing a blanket, created bonds that became lifelines in a world dominated by chaos and death. News from home arrived sporadically. Letters reminded the soldiers of what they were fighting for: family, freedom, and a world beyond the war. For Harris, his mother's words were a source of strength, grounding him in the belief that his sacrifices were meaningful. For O'Connor, the sketches from his younger sister served as reminders of innocence, of life untouched by bullets and bombs. These small connections provided emotional sustenance, a fragile thread linking the front lines to the world beyond. As the campaign progressed, the soldiers encountered increasingly complex scenarios. Urban warfare in small towns required precision and coordination. Mines, snipers, and booby traps created unpredictable dangers at every turn. Harris learned to move silently, to anticipate threats, to rely on the instincts honed through days of combat. O'Connor discovered the importance of communication, using hand signals and coded messages to coordinate with his squad amidst the din of battle. The skills they had developed in training were no longer abstract, they were matters of life and death. Despite the horrors, moments of unexpected humanity emerged. Soldiers sometimes shared food with starving civilians, offered medical assistance to the wounded, and helped repair homes damaged in crossfire. These acts were fleeting, often overshadowed by the brutality surrounding them, yet they provided a reminder of why the war mattered. Beyond strategy, beyond territory, the soldiers fought for the preservation of life, for the defense of principles that transcended borders. One particular battle left an indelible mark on Harris. While advancing through a ravaged village, he and his squad found a group of children hiding in a cellar. Their parents had been killed in the shelling, leaving the young ones terrified and alone. Harris led them to safety, guiding them through the debris-laden streets to a makeshift refugee center. The sight of their frightened eyes, the relief that washed over their faces, struck a chord he could not ignore. It was a stark reminder that war was never only about strategy and victory. It was about the human lives at stake, the innocent caught in its path. Amidst the chaos, the soldiers developed resilience. Each encounter, each narrow escape, honed their instincts and sharpened their judgment. Fear became familiar, courage habitual. The battles tested. More than skill, they tested character, forcing each man to confront the fragility of life and the weight of responsibility. By the time they reached the next stage of the campaign, Harris and O'Connor were transformed. They were no longer novices. They were veterans in their own right, hardened yet still capable of empathy, aware of the stakes yet committed to the mission. The letters home continued to arrive, a reminder that despite the destruction and loss, life persisted beyond the front lines. Harris read his mother's words aloud to his squadmates during brief moments of rest, drawing comfort from shared memories and familial bonds. O'Connor tucked a sketch from his sister into his jacket pocket, carrying it like a talisman. These connections became symbols of hope, sustaining the soldiers through the relentless rhythm of war. As the days turned into weeks, the campaign pushed the men to their limits. Physical exhaustion, emotional strain, and the constant presence of death shaped every decision. Yet they persisted. They fought not for glory or recognition, but for each other, for the civilians they could protect, and for the ideals that had brought them into uniform. Every victory, every life saved, reinforced their resolve. Every loss, every casualty, reminded them of the fragility of existence and the heavy burden of duty. By the end of the campaign, the young soldiers had endured hardships that would define their lives forever. They had witnessed the full spectrum of war, fear, courage, loss, and compassion. They had faced death and survived, not as individuals, but as a unit, bound by shared experience and unwavering loyalty. The lessons they learned on those battlefields would stay with them, shaping their understanding of humanity, sacrifice, and the true cost of freedom. And yet, even as they paused to regroup and recover, they knew that the war was far from over. The battles they had fought were only the beginning, and the challenges ahead would test not only their physical endurance, but their moral courage, their faith in humanity, and their ability to persevere in the face of unimaginable adversity. The autumn winds swept across the battlefield as the soldiers of the 1st Infantry Division regrouped after weeks of relentless fighting. The terrain, scarred by artillery and bomb craters, reflected the intensity of the battles they had endured. For Private John Harris and Corporal Michael O'Connor, the hardships of the front lines had become familiar, yet the war still carried the same unpredictable terror. Every step forward brought the weight of responsibility and the risk of sudden loss. By now, the soldiers had witnessed the turning points of the conflict. The first major breakthrough came with the Battle of Stalingrad, where American advisors observed the relentless resilience of their allies and the devastation inflicted upon both soldiers and civilians. The city was a landscape of fire and rubble, every building a potential trap, every street a battleground. Harris and O'Connor were stationed nearby, assisting in supply and communication operations, witnessing firsthand the courage required to endure urban warfare. Stalingrad was more than a battle. It was a test of endurance, strategy, and sheer willpower. Soldiers moved through the ruins cautiously, avoiding snipers and booby traps while trying to maintain lines of supply and communication. Harris marveled at the determination of men who, despite fatigue and starvation, pressed forward to defend every inch of ground. Their resilience became a model for the younger soldiers, a reminder that courage was measured not only in victories, but in the refusal to surrender under impossible circumstances. Meanwhile, the soldiers of the American divisions prepared for Operation Overlord, the D-Day invasion that would mark a decisive shift in the European theatre. Months of preparation had gone into planning the amphibious assault, yet the anticipation was tempered by fear. Harris trained relentlessly, running drills, memorizing beach landing tactics, and familiarizing himself with the terrain. O'Connor spent long hours studying maps, calculating artillery positions, and coordinating with Allied forces. The enormity of the task weighed heavily, but the soldiers knew that the success of the invasion could turn the tide of the war. The 6th of June, 1944, dawned with a grey, misty sky over the Normandy coastline. The soldiers were loaded onto landing crafts, engines roaring beneath them as they approached the shore. Harris clutched his rifle, knuckles white, heart racing with a mixture of fear and determination. Around him, men whispered short prayers or muttered the names of loved ones, seeking courage in the familiarity of memory. The moment the ramps dropped, the men surged forward into gunfire, artillery shells, and crashing waves. Chaos enveloped them instantly, but training and instinct took over. Each step was a negotiation with death, each decision a test of survival and courage. Amidst the carnage, acts of heroism emerged spontaneously. Soldiers shielded their comrades from gunfire, pulled the wounded from exposed positions, and advanced relentlessly under a hail of bullets. Harris found himself leading a small group toward a heavily fortified bunker. Bullets whizzing past, the sound of explosions reverberating in his ears. With careful coordination, they neutralized the position, enabling the rest of the company to advance. The sense of accomplishment was fleeting. The battle was far from over, yet every victory, no matter how small, contributed to the larger objective of liberating occupied territories. O'Connor experienced a different kind of challenge on the beach. A fellow soldier had been pinned down by machine gun fire, unable to move. Without hesitation, O'Connor sprinted across open ground, dodging bullets, and dragged the wounded man to cover. The act was instinctual, fueled by camaraderie and the unspoken understanding that no soldier could survive alone. Moments like these defined the essence of war, courage not measured in accolades, but in the determination to protect and endure, often at great personal risk. The aftermath of the invasion left both triumph and sorrow in equal measure. Entire towns were liberated, but the cost was staggering. Families had been displaced, homes destroyed, and countless civilians killed or injured. Harris and O'Connor assisted in distributing medical aid, coordinating refugee relief, and rebuilding essential infrastructure. These duties were a stark reminder that the role of a soldier extended beyond combat. Each act of service, each effort to restore normalcy, carried its own form of heroism, often overlooked in the grand narratives of war. As the Allies advanced through France, Harris and O'Connor encountered pockets of resistance. Small units of enemy soldiers, isolated and desperate, launched sudden ambushes, forcing the Americans to adapt quickly. The soldiers learned to anticipate danger, to communicate silently, and to make split-second decisions that could mean the difference between life and death. In these encounters, fear was a constant companion, but discipline and training allowed them to act decisively, transforming panic into measured action. One particularly intense skirmish occurred in a dense forest near a strategic village. Harris's unit was tasked with clearing the area of enemy snipers who had been disrupting supply lines. The trees, thick and close together, provided cover for hidden adversaries. Harris moved cautiously, signaling his squad to advance in staggered formation. Suddenly, a shot rang out, hitting the ground inches from his boot. Instinct took over, and he returned fire, suppressing the enemy position long enough for O'Connor to flank and neutralize the threat. When the forest finally fell silent, Harris realized that the line between survival and death had been razor thin, and that courage often manifested in moments of pure instinct rather than deliberate calculation. The winter months brought a different set of challenges. Frostbite, snowstorms, and freezing temperatures tested the soldiers' endurance. Supply lines were strained, and maintaining morale became a critical concern. Yet, in the harshest conditions, acts of humanity persisted. Soldiers shared blankets, built makeshift shelters, and rationed food to ensure that everyone survived the bitter cold. Harris and O'Connor witnessed the resilience of the human spirit, the ability to endure suffering while maintaining compassion for others, even in the most unforgiving circumstances. Amid the physical challenges, the psychological toll of war became increasingly evident. Soldiers carried memories of fallen comrades, the faces of civilians affected by conflict, and the weight of decisions made under duress. Harris often found himself staring into the distance, reflecting on the paradox of war, that courage and destruction, compassion and cruelty, coexisted in every moment. O'Connor kept a journal, documenting both the horrors and the triumphs, seeking to preserve a record of human experience that went beyond strategy and statistics. As the Allies pushed toward Germany, Harris and O'Connor participated in liberating concentration camps. The horrors they witnessed were unimaginable. Survivors, emaciated and traumatized, clung to life with a desperation that left a lasting impact on the soldiers. Harris helped provide medical aid, distributing food and blankets, while O'Connor assisted in organizing transport for those too weak to move on their own. The experience was both harrowing and transformative. The soldiers confronted the depths of human cruelty, yet they also witnessed resilience and hope, the determination of survivors to reclaim their lives. The liberation of the camps left an indelible mark. Harris struggled with the scale of suffering, the brutality inflicted upon innocents, and the knowledge that such atrocities could exist within the modern world. Yet, the experience reinforced the purpose of their mission: to confront tyranny, protect the vulnerable, and uphold principles of justice and humanity. O'Connor reflected that courage was not merely the willingness to face danger on the battlefield, but the capacity to confront moral and ethical challenges with integrity and empathy. As the final campaigns unfolded, Harris and O'Connor continued to demonstrate leadership and resilience. They faced intense battles in urban environments, strategic offensives across river crossings, and the relentless push into enemy territory. Each engagement tested their physical endurance, mental fortitude, and emotional resilience. The bonds they had forged with fellow soldiers became lifelines, each man relying on the other for survival and support. In moments of extreme stress, small gestures, sharing a cigarette, offering reassurance, or simply maintaining eye contact provided the strength needed to persevere. In the final months of the war, as Allied forces converged on Berlin, the soldiers witnessed both victory and devastation. Entire neighborhoods lay in ruins, families displaced, and the remnants of enemy forces scattered. Harris and O'Connor reflected on the journey that had brought them from inexperienced recruits to seasoned veterans. They had endured fear, witnessed death, and confronted the moral complexities of combat. Yet they had also displayed courage, compassion, and resilience. Their experiences underscored the reality that heroism in war is not measured solely by victories, but by the perseverance of humanity amidst chaos. As the war drew to a close, the soldiers returned home, carrying with them memories that would last a lifetime. Harris reunited with his family, O'Connor with his sister, but both knew that the battlefield had changed them irrevocably. The lessons learned about courage, sacrifice, and the cost of freedom remained, shaping their understanding of duty and humanity. They had faced the extremes of human experience and survived, not only as soldiers, but as individuals committed to principles greater than themselves. The stories of Harris, O'Connor, and countless others form the backbone of Hearts in Uniform. They remind us that the price of freedom is immense, that courage is tested in both extraordinary and ordinary moments, and that the human spirit can endure even in the darkest circumstances. Every battle, every act of sacrifice, and every display of compassion contributes to a narrative that honors the men and women who risked everything in the service of others. And so, the journey continues not only as a record of war, but as a testament to the enduring strength, resilience, and courage of those who stand in uniform. Their legacy is not only in the victories they achieved, but in the humanity they preserved, the lives they saved, and the example they set for generations to come. The story of Hearts in Uniform is a story of sacrifice, courage, and the unwavering commitment to protect and serve, even in the face of unimaginable adversity. The war had ended, but its echoes reverberated long after the guns fell silent. For soldiers like John Harris and Michael O'Connor, returning home did not mean returning to normal. The world they had left behind had changed, and they themselves had changed in ways that only time and reflection could reveal. Their bodies bore scars, their minds carried memories, and their hearts held the weight of experiences that could never be fully shared. Harris returned to his small hometown, greeted by familiar streets, neighbors, and the comforts of family. Yet, beneath the surface of everyday life, he wrestled with the shadows of battle. The images of friends lost, of civilians caught in the crossfire, and of the unimaginable suffering at liberated camps haunted him. Every sound, every smell, every fleeting shadow could bring him back to the front lines. Sleep was elusive, and when it came, it often brought dreams of trenches, explosions, and faces that could not be forgotten. O'Connor faced a different kind of reintegration. The letters he had written during the war remained carefully preserved, a reminder of the discipline and order of the battlefield. Yet, the pages also revealed a young man learning the full weight of responsibility, grappling with decisions that had life or death consequences. The friends he had relied on, the camaraderie that had sustained him, could never be fully replaced. Returning to civilian life required rebuilding not only routines, but also a sense of identity separate from the uniform that had defined him. For many soldiers, the hardest battles were those fought within. Harris found solace in community, volunteering with veteran groups and speaking to younger generations about the realities of war. He emphasized the courage required not just on the battlefield, but in the moral decisions soldiers faced every day. O'Connor became an advocate for mental health, understanding that resilience was as much about acknowledging pain as it was about enduring it. Together, they helped transform the collective memory of the war from one of only heroism and sacrifice to a more nuanced story, including the cost of courage, guilt, and recovery. One of the most profound realizations for returning soldiers was understanding the impact of their actions, both large and small. Harris reflected on moments where split-second decisions had saved lives, where teamwork had prevented disaster, and where courage had manifested not as bold gestures, but in quiet, unseen acts. O'Connor thought often about the civilians they had encountered, the families liberated from oppression, and the countless individuals whose lives were forever altered by the intervention of the Allied forces. Their reflections revealed that heroism in uniform was inseparable from empathy and accountability. In towns and cities across the United States, communities struggled to honor the sacrifices of returning soldiers. Memorials were erected, parades organized, and ceremonies held. Yet these public acknowledgments often failed to capture the depth of personal transformation experienced by those who had seen the realities of war. Harris and O'Connor understood that remembrance was not only about monuments or medals, but about ensuring that the lessons of courage, sacrifice, and resilience were passed on to future generations. Education became a key element in preserving the legacy of soldiers. Harris partnered with local schools, sharing stories of endurance, decision-making under pressure, and the moral complexities of war. He spoke not only of battles won and objectives achieved, but of moments of fear, doubt, and human compassion. Students learned that courage was not the absence of fear, but the ability to act despite it. O'Connor contributed by documenting personal accounts, creating written and recorded histories that preserved the voices of those who had lived through the conflict. Their work ensured that the human dimension of war, its ethical dilemmas, emotional toll, and personal triumphs was remembered alongside historical facts. As the decades passed, Harris and O'Connor witnessed the evolution of society and the shifting perspectives on the Second World War. The geopolitical landscape changed, new conflicts arose, and generations grew up distant from the events that had defined their lives. Yet the principles instilled during service discipline, courage, empathy, and moral responsibility remained guiding lights. Veterans organizations became lifelines, providing support networks and fostering a sense of shared identity among those who had endured similar trials. One enduring truth became clear to both men. Courage in uniform extended beyond the battlefield. It manifested in everyday decisions, in the choice to help others, to act ethically under pressure, and to bear witness to truth even when inconvenient or painful. Harris and O'Connor understood that the uniform was not merely clothing. It was a symbol of commitment to something greater than oneself, a reminder that every action carried weight and every decision had consequences. Families, too, became part of the narrative. Harris's children and grandchildren grew up hearing stories of resilience and courage, learning that bravery was as much about character as it was about action. O'Connor's nieces and nephews were inspired by his reflections, understanding that the lessons of the past could inform their own moral compass. The experiences of these soldiers became living history, a bridge between generations, ensuring that the values they fought for, freedom, justice, and humanity, remained alive. The process of reflection was often painful. Harris and O'Connor confronted moments they wished could be undone, mistakes that could not be corrected, and the haunting memory of lives lost. Yet through these reflections, they discovered the transformative power of reconciliation and purpose. By sharing their experiences, supporting other veterans, and engaging with communities, they turned pain into lessons, fear into courage, and memory into guidance for those who would follow. In the broader historical context, the legacy of soldiers like Harris and O'Connor illustrates the enduring impact of courage and moral responsibility. Their stories remind us that wars are not merely contests of strategy and strength, but tests of human character. Decisions made under extreme pressure, acts of empathy in the face of cruelty, and the willingness to protect and serve define true heroism. These are the stories that shape national identity, inform ethical leadership, and inspire future generations to act with integrity and courage. The lessons of hearts in uniform extend beyond military service. They apply to all walks of life where courage, responsibility, and resilience are tested. Whether in times of conflict, crisis, or moral challenge, the principles demonstrated by soldiers in uniform serve as a beacon for ethical and brave action. Harris and O'Connor exemplified the power of individual choice, the importance of empathy, and the necessity of perseverance, demonstrating that heroism is not measured by medals or recognition, but by the positive impact one leaves on others. As they aged, both men found peace in service, not only in the battles they had fought, but in the lives they had touched and the legacies they had helped create. Communities celebrated them, not merely as war heroes, but as moral exemplars, as men who had navigated the most harrowing circumstances and emerged with a commitment to humanity intact. Their stories became a testament to the enduring strength of the human spirit, the transformative power of courage, and the profound importance of ethical action. The final chapter of Hearts in Uniform is a reflection on continuity, memory, and hope. Harris and O'Connor understood that the future depends on the preservation of these lessons, on teaching younger generations that courage and compassion are inseparable, and that the cost of freedom and human dignity is eternal vigilance. They reminded us that history is not simply events in the past, but a living repository of moral guidance, shaped by those willing to act with bravery, integrity, and empathy. Their journeys, though born in war, concluded in the quiet victories of everyday life, helping others, supporting family, educating communities, and preserving memory. The uniform may have been left behind, but its principles remained. Every act of service, every moment of courage, and every decision to uphold humanity became a continuation of the values for which they had once risked everything. In the end, Hearts in Uniform is more than a chronicle of battles fought or medals earned. It is a celebration of courage, sacrifice, and the indomitable human spirit. It honors those who stood in uniform, facing unimaginable challenges, yet holding fast to the principles that define the best of humanity. It reminds us that heroism is not only about grand gestures, but about the consistent, everyday choices to act with integrity, to protect others, and to strive for a better world. As the sun set on the final pages of their stories, Harris and O'Connor looked back not with bitterness, but with understanding. They knew the price of courage, the weight of sacrifice, and the importance of memory. And they knew, above all, that the true legacy of soldiers lies not in their battles, but in the lives they touched, the lessons they imparted, and the enduring hope they inspired in generations to come. Hearts in Uniform is their story, a story of courage under fire, of humanity amidst chaos, and of the enduring power of moral responsibility. It is a story that will continue to inspire, to teach, and to remind us all that even in the darkest of times, the heart of a hero beats with unwavering resolve.